The September window is over. Good riddance in many ways. It wasn't pretty. And that's it. No more games for the U.S. men's national team ahead of the World Cup. They will converge next time in weeks, November 9th, when the roster is announced. We have a pretty good idea who's going to be on there. I would imagine Greg Berhalter doesn't want to complicate his life, as we've said in the past. And the 26 players he has pretty much decided. However, he did say at the end of the two games against Japan and Saudi Arabia, the players go to their club, work on their game, suggesting that, of course, there's going to be a watchful eye and some guys could improve their stock, whether they can become a fringe player to maybe a featured player, whether they can come from the wrong side of the cut line to the right side. There's still going to be movement because you've got to pick players that you think you can give an edge in a close battle. There might be injuries. So today, in addition to the return of the top 5 American players in Europe this past weekend, we will be taking a look at the players that I feel could have the most to gain over the next few weeks based on what we've heard from Greg Berhalter and the U.S. men's national team staff about the pecking order. Obviously, a lot's been made of the style of play. Everyone's heaping on that this playing out of the back and maybe playing with that one forward and maybe reinforcing the midfield is something that the U.S. should do. I would like to make some alterations, but realistically, I don't think there's going to be much of that. It's just too late in the game. And Greg Berhalter has been pretty steadfast and stubborn with regards to the tactics. So he is going to go. He's going to find the guys that can execute this as best as possible. So we're going to look at all of that today on the Soccer OG. Check out the Soccer OG podcast where all podcasts are available. Check out the Eric Winalda conversation and the Heath Pierce following the games from last week. I think you'll enjoy them. They still hold up. A lot of good data after those two games. And coming up in my next podcast, Meg Swanek, who covers U.S. men's national team, will also get into this really unfortunate, unsavory report from Sally Yates about the NWSL and some just abominable allegations and realities from some of the coaches there. And of course, like and subscribe here. That's going to be a good conversation. Looking forward to talking with Meg as let's go 2 feet into this, okay? Few things. The September window really left this team exposed. There's not much you could do about it. There was a quote from Kellen Acosta talking about how some media members or some soccer accounts out there, some fans, pull against certain players so much that he feels that many of these people would prefer to see the U.S. fail. I hope that's not true. I can understand the frustration from Kellen Acosta. As I said in my last video, it's not healthy right now. People aren't that excited about the World Cup, and they're not going to get more excited when they hear anything about this team. It's usually negative. And rightfully so, but it's not all. You don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. And, one of the things that I've been hearing a lot lately, following the Japan game, let's remember, this was one game. Japan had a great game plan. They executed. Japan may be a lot better than we think. Maybe they're a team that goes on a deep quarterfinal. They almost made the quarterfinals 4 years ago, maybe deeper. But that the teams in the U.S. men's national team group should adopt the tactics of Japan when they play the U.S. England, by the way, there's a really interesting conversation from Gary Neville about England not being able to field a quality back four. He feels that they have the good fullbacks that can be wingbacks, Luke Shaw, TTA, Trent Arnold, other guys, Kyle Walker, that can be on wingbacks, and then you play 3 center backs there to fortify the defense because that's where they need the help the most. Again, just like the U.S., I don't know if Gareth Southgate's going to make these huge adjustments. And I think that's the point I'm going to make. And I don't think you're going to see these teams make huge adjustments. It's too late. And these coaches don't want egg on their face. They go, this is the style we trotted out there. And this is the style that got us into the World Cup. And this is the style we're going to play with in Qatar. And that could benefit the U.S. because people are saying, why doesn't the teams in their group play like Japan? Well, maybe England does. Maybe England presses the defenders so that they can spill the ball that we saw in that game in Dusseldorf. But Wales and Iran, while Iran did play with the ball a lot in qualifying, but we've got to remember they were playing Lebanon and Iraq and Bahrain, so they were going to get more of the ball. But when Iran played these friendlies, they played Uruguay. They beat Uruguay, but Uruguay had like 70% possession. And that's not Uruguay's game. Uruguay lets opponents play, right? So that told me that Iran's not changing anything. They're going to play where they had success. And if you look back at the 2018 World Cup, Iran averaged about 26% of possession, which means they're not going to be pressing. They're not going to be trying to turn over the U.S. They don't want the ball. They will survive on this counterattack. So the good news is I don't think the U.S. is going to face a Japan test in 2 of those 3 games. Wales, in the last Euros, average, granted, they're playing a higher caliber of team, they averaged possession in the 30 percentile. In these games, you watch how they qualified when they got by Ukraine. They counterattacked. Granted, they have some really good counterattackers, but you're not going to see a system like we saw in Japan. If we do, it would be very weird. So I'm a little surprised so many people feel like, flip the switch, start pressing hard and turn over this team because Japan did it. It's just not realistic to me. I've watched a lot of football in my life. I just don't see those things happen. Teams are teams. They have an identity. So that said, certain players I think could seize the opportunity and make a breakthrough. Obviously, let's start at the most criticized part of the field, the center back pairing. I defend Aaron Long. I defend Walker Zimmerman. But it wasn't good, either game. It was hard. And I think the criticism went away a little bit overboard, but it's something that you hope you can upgrade with. Who could the upgrades be? Chris Richards, perhaps. Well, Chris Richards still isn't healthy. And we're on the clock. We're into October. He has a month to get back in there. And when he does, he wasn't a featured player for Crystal Palace. So Chris Richards isn't going to get a lot of minutes, I don't think, between now and then. The sooner he can get back in the lineup, the better. But to put a guy who's playing maybe 5 minutes, it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense for all of a sudden him to jump in front of, in all likelihood, Aaron Long. Walker Zimmerman's going to be a starter. Aaron Long is up for grabs, but I don't think Greg Berhalter wants to switch that a lot. Now, that said, Mark McKenzie did come in for both games, played well in the game against Japan, I would think. He was one of the bright spots. Not great against Saudi Arabia. 2 really bad mistakes when he came upon him. But Mark McKenzie is hitting his numbers with Genk in the Belgian League. The Belgian League has been very good for the U.S. men's national team. Mark McKenzie has started the last 7 games for Genk, who are now, I believe, 2nd in the Jupiler League. He didn't start the first couple games, but he is in there now. Coach trusts him. Mark McKenzie is going to be a regular contributor. They don't allow a lot of goals. I watch extended highlights. I don't watch the games. But what I see is Mark McKenzie looks pretty solid, and I think he's going to get those opportunities. So Mark McKenzie is a guy that perhaps could slip in and get more minutes, if not start. I think Greg Berhalter trusts him enough. Cameron Carter-Vickers is injured. I think he's probably behind McKenzie now in the pecking order because he wasn't really in the team in 2021. Eric Palmer-Brown getting some nice games in Fautois. Maybe. But of all the center back candidates, and Chris Richards is number 1, but he's not playing. And what can you do? So Mark McKenzie's at the top of my list because I think we could see him penciled in as a starter. Ricardo Pepe. Ricardo Pepe scoring a goal for Groningen in the Dutch Eredivisie. That was the only goal scored by the team. It was a really nice goal. He just worked really hard to get it. And Alkmaar beat them 4-1. So it wasn't good. So Ricardo Pepe, despite getting the goals, probably not feeling great about himself because of the results. He is in the system with Greg Berhalter. Jordan Pefok played for Union Berlin, he was well contained, and against Eintracht Frankfurt, Union Berlin no longer in first place in the Bundesliga. I think they're going to probably suffer a little bit, but Pefok's going to get his goals. The problem for Pefok, and a lot of people felt, reading into what Greg Berhalter said, that Pefok still has a chance to get on this team. He just didn't get called into the September squad because Greg Berhalter knows what he can get from him, which sounds a bit odd for someone that hasn't really been regularly getting into the roster. So, I don't know. It would be a pleasant surprise to see Jordan Pefok's name in there. As many people have said, ad nauseum, everyone's saying the same things. There's a really weird echo chamber on social media for the U.S. men's national team. Someone has a take, someone repeats it, cut and paste, Everyone's saying the same thing. Have an original thought. But the thought is, bring in Jordan Pefok. He'd be really good in the last 10 minutes. Maybe you play with the second forward. I don't see it. If it happens, great, because I feel a little better with a quality center forward. But Ricardo Pepe's ahead of Jordan Pefok. Jesus Ferreira's not going anywhere, and Josh Sargent, I think, is in the bloodstream too, even though he didn't get a chance to express himself in September games. Ricardo Pepe scored that goal. He's got a couple goals in the Dutch league. He looks more comfortable. He is going to be the guy, perhaps, to get a start. He started in the Saudi Arabia game in a big spot, with a Christian Pulisic alongside him. And who was the other wide player? It was very well fortified. It was a very well fortified squad. Oh, Gio Reyna. So Ricardo Pepe, for a guy that we were a little worried about, he got called in before he started scoring goals, but now he has a couple goals. He should be back in there as well. We have those injuries, right? Yunus Musa's returned to training. Tim Weah made the squad this past week for Lille. Cameron Carter-Vickers, Chris Richards, will wait and see. Chris Richards, by the way, joined the cast of Ted Lasso at the NFL game in London, and they sang Sweet Caroline. And it was really nice. It was very nice to see. I'm living in fear of Ted Lasso Season 3 because my Twitter timeline is going to be overwhelmed. I like the show. I'm not crazy about it. I like it. I'm going to watch. But I don't need anyone to tell me how it's changed their life. Sorry. Joe Scally, interesting. Very interesting. I watched the game this weekend where Borussia Mönchengladbach got demolished by Werder Bremen. They were down 3 goals. They allowed 6 shots in the opening minutes. It was a tough game defensively for Joe Scally. He looked good in the September game when he came in against Saudi Arabia. Now, in the game against Werder Bremen, he was on the hook for 2 goals. And you don't want to see that. But when they fell down 3 goals, they pushed him forward. And going forward, Joe Scally looked pretty good. And it made me think that maybe if you need that go-forward person as a right back, possibly a left back, Joe Scally, he's going to play all these games for Mönchengladbach. He's going to start. He starts and he goes a lot of minutes. Joe Scally, his prospects are looking better than they did 2 weeks ago. They're looking a lot better than they looked 2 months ago. So Joe Scally could be another one to get in that mix. The last guy, before I get into my top 5, that I think has a lot to gain, and we're all kind of basing this around something Greg Berhalter said, that he said this U.S. team in September is missing 5 starters. And if you do the math, you go, okay, maybe Chris Richards, Yunus Musa, Tim Weah, who else? Well, there was a fourth field player. Anthony Robinson. And then who's the 5th? And the only one we could think of was Zach Stefan. Right? Who could the 5th be? Zach Stefan, after dropping from the number 1 at Middlesbrough, has started the last 2 games in the championship for the club. They've only allowed 1 goal in those 2 games. There was a highlight out there where things looked pretty frightening. He made a big howler, and that's the issue with Zach Stefan. And everyone's terrified that the one mistake could cost the U.S. big, which it could. They're not scoring goals. The U.S. is not scoring goals right now. They did give up the 2 to Japan, but otherwise they've been pretty good defensively. But they're not scoring goals, so a bad mistake could be poisonous, cataclysmic for the U.S. But Zach Stefan's playing. Based on what Greg Berhalter's saying, Zach Stefan will continue to play and maybe get in to the good graces and be the number one, even though Matt Turner started the 2 games in September. I want Matt Turner, but based on what Greg Berhalter's saying and the fact that Zach Stefan's going to be playing where Matt Turner's not going to be playing all that much, put him on the list of guys with a lot to gain. There's still opportunities. I don't know if there's a lot of opportunities to make this team. I think that's decided, but there's opportunities to go up a peg or two. Time now for the top 5 Americans in Europe. It wasn't top heavy, but we had some nice moments. So, there wasn't a spectacular performance, even a really, really good performance, but there were some positive ones. Weston McKennie, comes in at number 5, put in a good hour for a Juventus team, assisted on a goal for Dusan Vlahovic. The hour is good. He's a step. He didn't have a great September window, so this was good to see him get that and get his confidence back, and hopefully that continues in the Champions League and in the Serie A. So Weston McKennie, key player for the U.S., has to do well. Ricardo Pepe comes in at number 4, even though Groningen got smashed. The goal was very good, and his trajectory's on the right side. They're going to enjoy him a lot more there at the Dutch club, and hopefully more goals and hopefully some results. But the goals are most important, right? Because when you haven't scored a goal in a year, to get 2 goals back-to-back, very, very nice. Number 3, Mark McKenzie hadn't made my list before. He should have. He does here. 7 straight starts, great defensive record. Clearly, he's playing well enough where Greg Berhalter noticed where he may have come close to start a game in that September window. A guy with a lot to gain. Mark McKenzie on the rise. Good news to get some depth in the center back pairing. He only played 6 minutes, but Christian Pulisic comes in at number 2. And I know it was a small, he assisted on the Conor Gallagher goal. Gallagher did the heavy lifting, but Pulisic did come in towards 4 defenders and was able to put Gallagher in a good spot. So we're claiming that. But I thought it was good that he came off the bench for a new manager in Graham Potter and showed what he could do. So even though he only played 6 minutes, he makes my list because this could be a springboard. We'll see what happens in the Champions League this week. And number 1, Tyler Adams. Leeds haven't been looking dynamic lately. Brendan Aronson hasn't really been getting going forward. But Leeds get a point against Aston Villa. And Leeds also, the fans said Tyler Adams was the man of the match. So I'm going with it. I was impressed. He was in the midfield. Marco Rosa got out because they had a red card to Luis Sinisterra. And then Tyler Adams made some good adjustments and was able to help Leeds, 10-man Leeds, rescue a point. Jesse Marsh with some interesting quotes out of there. Check out my podcast. I'll get into those quotes from Jesse Marsh. As always, check out the Soccer OG podcast library for everything there. Like and subscribe us here. We're into October. Let's get excited. Let's get excited.